row home studio in Baltimore. So for row homes, for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it's kind of a Baltimore thing. It's a townhouse, it's a in a row. And so the studio itself was not that wide. The live room was maybe 15 feet long and 10 feet wide. So as a drum room, I learned really how to get sounds, big sounds, in a little room. I think there's a track we might listen to later, but there's a trick on it. If you put a mic facing the floor in front of the kit, so take like a large diaphragm condenser, like I would think I used a Neumann 102, put it about 5 inches off the floor, 3 feet in front of the kick drum. If you don't have a big room, right? If the furthest away you can get is 6 feet and your mic's going to be next to a wall, well, that's not really where I want my room mic to be. That's reflection city. You're not really in a good zone. It's probably all cymbal anyway. So I put the mic facing down, and what that gets is a realistic kick sound, minimal cymbal, and the cymbal that you do get is not too bright. And then if you hyper compress that, that's the whole drum sound.
That's sick. I love it. Well, we definitely get into that in the Sauce segment. We're going to listen to one of those tracks. Maybe you could go a little deeper on your approach to tracking drums, because you said drums are your number one instrument. And I heard some really cool drum sounds on a bunch of the records you sent me. Tell me a bit about your process on drums.
Kind of like I was saying earlier, just before this, I came from if you don't have a great mic and if you don't have a great room, the best thing to do is get vibe, just crush it or manipulate it and just make it feel something, So if that's just one mic in a room, I like to use dynamic omnis for things like that. You can really get cool sounds just obviously by crushing or EQing things in a crazy way. But as I've gotten to work in better rooms and have more mic choices, I'm a lunatic when it comes to drums. I'll put 25 mics. I know I should only use 4, and I want to be that guy that just uses 4 mics, but I'm absolutely out of my mind. I'll put up 3 pairs of overheads if I'm tracking a full record, because I don't want to be tied into a LDC or a SDC kind of like sound. Maybe I want a ribbon overhead, so I'll set up ribbon overheads with condensers, and then maybe I'll also do a Glyn Johns or something, or a Recorder Man, so that if one song's a folk song and I want to have live kind of roomy, vibey drums, I can just do it, and I don't have to keep going into that room and resetting up.
Wow, I love it. So you're kind of over-tracking and then selecting which tracks to use on a particular track down the line.
Oh, I'll definitely just end up using 4 mics, on the recording. I don't need to use all of them, but I've been burned so many times because I didn't mic the ride. And then all of a sudden you're using a sample, and so your overheads aren't cranked because you've decided that you needed to use a sampled snare or something to get the sound you want, but like now you can't hear the ride, and there's no way to get that back unless you bring up your overheads, but that's not the sound you want. So yeah, I definitely try to over mic. But one trick that I do a lot is these EV635As. I just mentioned the dynamic omnis.
I was like, oh, what's an omni mic that's dynamic?
Yeah. So EV635As are they used to be like a reporter microphone. So it's like a little handheld microphone. It's still in production, so EV still makes them today. You can buy a new one. You can get used ones for like, I don't know, $200, maybe less. I learned about them from the engineer who does all like the Dap Tones records, Dap Kings. And he'll just use 2 on the drum kit, 1 2 feet out in front and maybe 1 overhead. I put 1 right next to the drummer's knee and compress it. Kind of that like crotch mic feeling where somebody puts like a SM7 over the kick drum or something and really compresses it. Like I put it there, and I was just doing a session yesterday and it ended up being like, that's the sound. Like that was it.
That's so cool. I love it. Wow. Yeah, and Electric Voice is a great company. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the RE20 and a lot of other mics that they make. But yeah, that's super cool. And any mixing tricks you have with drums specifically?
Saturation. saturate. Kicks, if you want, a lot of times I don't really EQ. So the Fab Filter Saturn 2, if I want that click, I can just choose to saturate, because it's a multi-band saturation plugin. I can just choose to saturate the mid and the top end, so I'm not getting any saturation on those kind of critical low frequencies that I want to be clean and punchy, but I can get that kind of tape saturated top end that you would get from running a kick hard into a tape machine, or maybe you've saturated on the way in. I'll typically do that.
Wow.
I like to do all kind of slower pre's for shells, so things like Neves for shells, something that's going to have that kind of, again, saturated kind of creamy punch to it, and then faster preamps for overheads. So things like API or True or the DAV pre's, things like that, even like an SSL kind of pre for the overheads, because I want my
Interesting.
cymbals.
I've never heard anybody kind of define those as like fast versus slow. Like I would think of like an API as like having a punchiness to it, or versus like Neve being warm and whatever. But I it's not like a compressor, right? Or maybe it is compressing.
Well, they have to handle transients. Mics are fast and slow. So certain mics, ribbon mics are slow. So if I want to mic somebody strumming an acoustic guitar, but I want to handle all those transients, then I might need to use a condenser instead of a ribbon. But if I want finger picked to sound larger than life, then I'm going to use a ribbon, because that, each transient's a little bit slower.
Right. Wow, so cool. Yeah, I feel like small diaphragm condensers handle transients in like maybe like a better way than a large diaphragm condenser, right? Like
True.
There's like a thing there, right? You get more transient from a small diaphragm, right?
That's what I hear. I don't know the science behind that off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, I would say that feels true. Putting up like a 184 instead of like an 87, and maybe it's just the size of the diaphragm, because you don't need as much force to move it, so it can pick up more nuance, because the bigger the capsule, the more force it takes to move.
Wow, so interesting. You're really teaching me a lot of stuff about recording that I never even thought about, so I love it.
I'm learning every day.
This is great. Yeah, it's what it's all about. If we don't keep learning, then we're not growing.
That's why I set up 3 overheads. Even if sometimes it's just for me, so on these classical sessions, sometimes I'll set up extra mics on a piano, as long as they're not in the video, because I don't want to look like a fool with 12 mics in the piano just because, but if you can't see them, I'm setting up more mics to be like, well, do I like, LDCs in ORTF 3 feet out? Well, it's just a test for me. If I have time, I will just experiment all day.
That's awesome. I love the love of technology plus music at the same time. It's so cool. Do you have any tricks to help you work faster when you're working on a record or a mix, maybe?
Throw your phone out the window. I don't don't open your email. Templates are huge. Something that I've been learning recently is using VCA instead of busing. So voltage controlled amplitude is what, I might have messed that up. But you can use a VCA to control like a number of tracks. So let's say I've got my drums. I've got 12 tracks of drums, kick in, snare top, all that. If you're sending all those to a bus, and this is early on in your process, right? And you're sending all that to a bus, and maybe you put a bus compressor on that. If you're still messing with levels all day, you don't know what you're doing. You're not focusing on, okay, how's that all of a sudden hitting the compressor?
Right.
And by the time you go and check that, if your ears aren't clued into that, and you're like, man, I just need more snare. Oh, well, now I'm getting minus 10 dB compression on my drum bus, and it's not parallel. So what I'll do is use VCAs as a way that you can kind of change the volume of all of those things at once. So instead of being able to turn down like a mix bus, because I'm like, oh, cool, I've got my drum bus and I want to turn it up and down, I make 12 drum tracks VCA 1, and then I can turn those up and down as a unit without actually messing with the bus compression, if that makes sense.
Right.
So then
it's like a pre-bus. Yeah.
Yeah. And then you actually just do parallel processing on all of those. So I will still have like a drum bus processing going on, and that's attached to that same VCA. So when I turn that up and down, the drums all come up and down as a unit. You can do everything individually too, but I found that to be kind of helpful because I did find with sometimes when you've got 150 tracks and you're the person who's arranged everything and you're still messing with stuff, like I'm arranging and mixing at the same time, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, what is going on this bus? Like what is happening?
Yeah.
So I wanted to try
to go out of control. Totally
avoid that.
I'm well aware of that. Yeah.
So
I do something similar, but it's a little different. But I use Logic for mixing, and they have these things called track stacks, which is kind of like it's also a bus basically, but but I just use it as a pre-bus bus. So like I'll have like a kick bus, or I guess drums is maybe not the most analogous thing here, but I'll have like different buses of like different, let's say, kinds of guitars that end up going into the acoustic guitar bus, So depending on like what the processing is, I'll do, like acoustic guitar 1, which is more of like a strumming pattern, will have a completely different like compressor and EQ versus like a finger picking guitar, which will have maybe a couple different tracks in it. And I'll have like a track stack of that, then all that goes into the bus afterwards. So it's kind of like
I use Logic too.
Pre-bus.
I love those.
Yeah. Yeah. So a track stack is something I like built into my template maybe like a year and a half ago to like just to amplify all this like these auxiliary buses, It's just another level of control.
Yeah. So that, building your own chains, making sure that you have your kind of default vocal chain, and maybe if you're, lately for me, it's obviously there's not a one size fits all, but I might have like rock vocal chain or like R&B chain, and those are all going to be kind of different. Unfortunately, the projects are so all over the place that I really don't know, that like this is what's going to work. But there are certain things like de-essers and EQs that you're going to use on a vocal.
Right.
So it's nice to it saves so much time not clicking to add even 30 plugins to a track if you're thinking about all the buses that you might have or all the vocal processing, reverbs.
Yeah, so that stuff is usually templated out, or you're just like popping in a preset channel strip, basically.
Yeah. So I build all those because every vocal is going to have maybe 3 or 4 reverbs and then a couple delays, and then I've got 4 reverbs for snare. And like whether or not I use all of them, it's just it's a pain to have to build them all every time.
Totally. Yeah, I'm all about that. Also, do you have any favorite plugins or creative tools that you use, whether recording or mixing?
I am all about sound toys. Who isn't? I find the one I use the most is the Echo Boy. And here's maybe okay, you know what? The more you talk, the more you remember what it is you do every day. You asked about one trick that I use maybe on everything. And I don't know when I started doing this, but if you want to get a cool sound out of like a vocal or a guitar, so what I'll do is on the Echo Boy, you can actually select any number of emulations, right? You've got the Space Echo or Echoplex or Bisonet, I don't know which, but Telray, anything. And what I'll do is you can select one of those and just put the time to 0 and the mix at 100. Boom. You just put your thing through an analog saturated tape emulation, but it's not like a nice tape. It's a dirty tape. Because I actually have a Space Echo to my side here. And I don't know when I did that for the first time, but basically just running something through that and taking no echo, but just using that as a saturator. That's got a crazy, that tape is old and it's dirty and that thing sounds crazy.
Wow. So you do that on like an individual track or an auxiliary bus or anything?
Yeah. I do that a lot for like vocals and guitars, or if you want to like pan a guitar wide, but it's the same take and you need it to feel different, you can just use that on one.
Nice. Totally. I love that. Yeah, I feel like that's like the classic Logic tip was you could use their tape delay as like a tape machine without any delay.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of my favorite tricks. I think that makes it onto everything here or there.
Nice. I love it. Let's jump into the sauce segment so people can hear what we're talking about. You sent me a song called Golden Calf by Yo No Say. So let's have a listen to it for about 90 seconds. We'll talk a bit afterwards about what went into it and what you did.
Cool.
Sound cool?
Yep.